The whole family heard my mother-in-law sneer at me across the birthday table and ask if I'd come just to freeload off her dinner. My husband Marcus slammed his fist on the oak and barked at me to hand over the cash envelope. So I did. But what I slipped across that table wasn't the $85. 000. They were expecting it was a single crumpled dollar bill and one folded legal document that made my mother-in-law's face go pale as a ghost. I'm Brenda, 32. A financial analyst. And this is the story of how I turned my own family's greed into a trap that destroyed them. For years, Marcus played the successful provider in tailored suits and a luxury SUV that I paid for, while his mother Martha treated my paycheck like her personal piggy bank. 3 weeks before that birthday, she sat in my kitchen and sobbed about a collapsing roof, pressing me for an $85. 000 loan I knew was pure fiction. So I played along. I brought her a cashier's check wrapped in a promissory note with her precious luxury car listed as collateral. She signed it, thinking she'd won. Then, on the night of her birthday, in front of every relative she'd ever lied to, I handed her that thin envelope and watched the whole charade collapse. What happened next cost her the car, the marriage, and every ounce of respect she had left. People actually envied us. At every family gathering, Marcus would stroll in looking like he'd just stepped off a yacht-tailored suits, a gold watch, and the keys to a brand-new luxury SUV dangling from his fingertips. His relatives ate it up. They'd whisper about how lucky I was to have landed such a successful provider. The truth could not have been more different. I was the one bringing home the real income as a financial analyst. And I was the one covering every single bill. The mortgage on our colonial $3, $400 a month. The utilities, the groceries, the insurance, and the $890 monthly auto loan payment on that gleaming SUV. Marcus used to stroke his ego. He hadn't contributed a cent since we signed the marriage certificate. He didn't even know what our electric bill ran. When I once asked him to help with the property tax, he laughed, said he'd handle the big stuff, and then charged a $1, $200 suit to my credit card while I was at a board meeting. Still, he demanded to be treated like the head of the household. In public, he was the successful businessman with the expensive taste. Privately, my paycheck was his personal fund. He never budgeted, never asked, never thanked. He just took. And every time his mother wanted something, a KitchenAid mixer, a weekend in Palm Springs, a designer handbag for no reason at all, Marcus looked at me with that expectant stare. And I paid. I told myself I was being a good wife. I thought being patient and generous would eventually make him appreciate me. Instead, my generosity just taught him he could take without consequence. The pattern went deeper than money. Marcus was a textbook mama's boy. Not the harmless kind who calls his mother too often, the destructive kind who sacrifices his own wife to keep his mother comfortable. If Martha complained my pot roast was dry, Marcus would announce to the whole table, "Yeah, Brenda's never been able to cook like you." Mom, if Martha mentioned she felt lonely, he'd cancel our anniversary reservations the same night and drive to her house. I became the scapegoat for every one of her little grievances. And he was more than happy to hand me over. I stayed quiet for years. I told myself he'd mature. I told myself his mother would eventually back off. I was wrong on both counts. Looking back, the money was never really the issue. The disrespect was. He married me because I was useful. And Martha saw me as nothing but her son's personal ATM. Then came that Tuesday in October, 3 weeks before her birthday dinner, when Martha showed up at my front door with a face like a funeral director. She stepped inside without taking off her coat and walked straight past me to the dining room. She didn't say hello. She didn't say the house smelled like a restaurant. She settled into her usual chair, folded her hands on the oak table, and stared at the candle flame like it had personally offended her. I asked if she wanted wine. Nothing. Water. Nothing. Marcus, predictably, stayed glued to his phone, grunting at nothing. It was 6:47. 7 minutes early, and Martha is never early. She's the kind of woman who walks into a funeral 5 minutes late just to make an entrance. That Tuesday was the second Tuesday of October. I'd spent the whole afternoon on dinner. Herb-crusted roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with toasted almonds, a sourdough loaf fresh from the oven. When I set the plate in front of her, Martha looked at it the way a food critic looks at a dropped sandwich. She picked up her fork, pushed one roasted carrot across the porcelain, and set the fork back down. She didn't take a single bite. Then she pushed the plate away exactly 2 inches, aligning it with the edge of the placemat like she was setting a chess piece. The silence got so thick I could have spread it on bread. I tried small talk. I got grunts. Marcus kept checking his watch like he was waiting for a flight. Even the dog abandoned the room. Then she dropped her fork. It hit the porcelain with a sharp, deliberate clatter loud enough that Marcus finally looked up from his phone. She let out a long, heavy, theatrical sigh. The kind that says, I have been carrying this enormous weight alone. She reached into her purse, pulled out a tissue, unfolded it with excruciating slowness, and started dabbing at the corners of her eyes. And here's the thing, there were no tears. I checked. I'd sat across from that woman for 8 years. And I'd learned to tell the difference between genuine grief and a rehearsed performance. Her hand trembled just a little too perfectly. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I knew that tissue. I knew that sigh. And I knew whatever came next was going to cost me. She lifted her gaze from the tissue and looked at Marcus first, then at me. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again like she was summoning the courage for something terribly difficult. Then she began, and the words came out as a practiced, trembling line. I didn't want to burden you two, but I have nowhere else to turn, Martha said, her voice cracking in all the right places. Martha let the sentence hang there for a long moment, letting the weight of it press down on the room like a storm cloud. Then she took a shaky breath and began, her voice painted with a devastation that was almost convincing. It's the house. Brenda. The roof. She described how, for the past few weeks, she'd noticed a faint damp smell in the upstairs hallway, something musty and wrong that she couldn't quite place. Richard had dismissed it. Of course. He always did. But then she'd gone up to the attic herself, and what she found had made her knees go weak. The insulation was wet and sagging, black, with moisture. And when the contractor she'd called pulled back the plywood, he'd found the beams underneath rotting from the inside out. Not from weather, not from age, but from a slow, hidden decay that had been spreading for years. One section was already bowing under the weight of the shingles. He said if we get one more heavy storm, Martha whispered, pressing the tissue to her lips, that section could collapse. We could be sitting in the living room watching television, and the whole ceiling could come down on our heads. I kept my face carefully neutral. The details were just specific enough to sound real. But I noticed she never said the contractor's name. She never showed a single photo. Never produced a written estimate. She was building the story the way she always did, just enough texture to make it feel solid. But nothing you could actually check. Then she moved to the HVAC. That's what she called it. The HVAC. A term I'd never once heard her use in 8 years of knowing her. She explained that the heating system had been making a low grinding sound for weeks. And 2 nights ago, it had shuddered to a complete stop. Dead. She and Richard had spent the entire night wrapped in every blanket they owned. Shivering. Richard stubbornly insisting he could fix it himself in the morning. You know how he is, she said with a sad little smile. Too proud to admit he's cold. He'd rather freeze than call for help. And then came the ultimatum. The contractor had supposedly done all the measurements, crunched all the numbers, and delivered his verdict. The repairs had to begin immediately. That very week. He had other jobs lined up. And if she didn't hand over the deposit by Friday, he'd walk. She and Richard would be pushed to the back of the line for months with the roof sagging overhead and the cold season just beginning. She paused. She let that sink in. Then she leaned forward slightly, lowered her voice to a breathless hush, and whispered the number, $85,000. The figure landed on the dining room table like a physical object. Heavy, cold, suffocating. She didn't say the word loan. She didn't say I'll pay you back. She just let the number sit there. The sheer astronomical size of it meant to be so overwhelming that no one would dare ask a follow-up question. And here's the thing I'll never forget. I looked at her in that moment, and I caught the corners of her mouth twitch with the ghost of a smile before she remembered to look devastated again. That was all I needed to confirm what I already knew. This was a performance. She was not afraid. She was not desperate. She was looking at me the way a casino looks at a tourist. Absolutely certain that the house always wins. I almost laughed. And I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself. There it was. The pivot. The moment Martha had been building toward all evening. She was about to play her most powerful card. And she knew it was unbeatable because it came straight from the heart of my father-in-law's character. She looked at Marcus with those dry, pitiful eyes and brought up Richard. And the way she did it, it was clinical. Calculated. She wasn't just telling us about a problem. She was telling us why we couldn't possibly ask Richard about it. She was closing the door on every question before it could even be asked. You know how your father is? Martha sobbed, her voice breaking at the perfect moment. She pressed the tissue to her nose and let out a shuddering breath. That man is the most proud person I have ever known. And I mean that with all my heart. Marcus. He would never, ever ask his own children for money. Not a single dollar. He would rather stand in that freezing, crumbling house with the roof sagging over his head than admit to a single soul that he needs help. She paused, letting the image sink in. Richard. Proud and silent. Slowly freezing in a rotting home. It was a devastating picture. And I watched it land on Marcus exactly as she'd intended. His jaw tightened. His fists clenched under the table. She went on, her voice dropping to a trembling whisper. I've been married to that man for decades. I know him better than anyone. His ego is the one thing in this world he will never surrender. If he found out I was sitting here tonight, asking for help, it would absolutely destroy him. It would break something in him that I could never put back together. She dabbed at her eyes again. And I noticed she never actually let a tear fall. Not one. So I have to carry this burden alone, she said, her voice cracking. I was going to keep this secret. I was going to figure it out by myself and never tell him. I would have let the house fall apart around us before I let him beg. But the contractor says the roof can't wait. So I came to you not because I want to, but because I have no other choice. And I'm begging you. I'm begging you both. Please, do not tell your father about any of this. Let him keep his pride. Let me deal with the shame of asking. Just help me quietly. And I'll do everything I can to make it up to you. I watched this entire performance unfold. And I have to admit, it was masterful. Because here's the thing, it was designed to be unverifiable. I couldn't call Richard and ask him if he knew about the roof, because that would expose Martha's secret and destroy him. I couldn't question the story, because questioning it meant disrespecting his pride. Martha had turned Richard's best quality, his fierce, honorable dignity, into an impenetrable fortress of lies. Any attempt to check the facts would make me the villain who shattered an old man's pride. And at the center of it all, she sat like a spider, watching me. Knowing that my logical mind was screaming this was a scam, but confident that my decency would shut me up. She wasn't asking for a loan. She was demanding I hand over my hard-earned savings without asking a single question. And the truly evil genius of it, she knew Marcus would never dig deeper. Because Marcus didn't want to dig. He wanted to be the hero. And Martha had just handed him the script for the role of a lifetime. So I sat there, gripping the edge of the table, looking at the two of them, the mother who'd weaponized her husband's honor, and the son who'd do anything to believe the lie. And I chose my next move very, very carefully. Marcus never saw the trap. He only saw his cue. His posture changed in an instant. The man who'd been slouched in his chair, half buried in his phone, suddenly snapped upright like he'd been electrocuted. He puffed out his chest, lifted his chin. And I watched the most dangerous thing happen right there in my dining room. He actually believed he was the lead in his own movie. He slammed his palm flat on the oak table. And the water glasses jumped. The candle flame flickered. Martha flinched a perfect, practiced flinch, timed as if his generosity had genuinely overwhelmed her. "Say no more." "Mom?" Marcus declared, his voice booming with manufactured authority. "We're family. Family takes care of family. I am not letting you and Dad live another night in a broken house." He said it like he'd been planning this rescue for weeks. He hadn't. He hadn't asked a single question about the contractor. He hadn't asked why insurance wasn't covering it. He hadn't asked why Richard, the most meticulously organized man I'd ever met, had somehow let an entire roof rot. And he most certainly hadn't asked me if we had $85,000 sitting in an account. None of that mattered. He wasn't solving a problem. He was performing a role. Then he turned to me. His voice dropped. Not softer, colder. More commanding. Like I was a junior analyst who'd missed a deadline. "Brenda, first thing tomorrow morning, you wire the money to Mom's account. All of it. Don't make her wait." "À comment?" Not a request. Not a conversation. He ordered me in front of his mother as if my paycheck, my savings, my years of quietly keeping this family solvent were simply his to redirect. And that's when something shifted inside me. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my napkin at him. I didn't argue a single point. I just sat there, gripping the edge of the dining table, knuckles white against the varnished wood, and let the echo of his order settle. Then I looked at Martha, behind the tissue pressed to her nose, behind the theatrical trembling of her shoulders. I caught it. A flash. A tiny, hungry gleam in her eye, the look a gambler gets when she knows she's already won the hand. She thought she had me cornered. I thought about Richard. About everything I actually knew about that man. Beyond Martha's carefully painted portrait. 29 years as a commissioned officer. Disciplined to the bone. I'd once seen the household ledger he kept in his study. Every utility bill filed. Every repair scheduled years in advance. Every penny accounted for down to the cent. A man who ran his home like a battalion would never let a roof rot from the inside out. He would have caught the rot before it started. He would have paid for the fix without a word. He certainly would never allow his wife to sneak behind his back. The math didn't add up. Not a single digit of it. Martha wasn't asking for help. She was robbing me, and she'd dressed the robbery in her husband's dignity. His pride wasn't a shield she was protecting. It was the knife she was using to cut my throat. Every instinct in my body told me to call her bluff right then and there. To look at Martha with the cold, flat truth and say, "There's nothing wrong with that roof. And we both know it." To watch her face crumple and then scramble. I wanted it. God. I wanted it so badly I could feel the words burning in my throat. But I didn't say a single one of them, because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. The moment that accusation left my mouth, I would become the villain of this story, the cold-hearted daughter-in-law attacking a fragile woman who'd come to me in tears. Martha would play her role perfectly. She'd dissolve into sobs so convincing that even I'd almost believe them. She'd clutch her chest, gasp for air, and tell Marcus she'd never felt so disrespected in her life. And Marcus, he wouldn't hesitate for even a heartbeat. He'd leap to his feet and scream at me like I was the one who'd done something unforgivable. The night would end with him yelling, her weeping, and me standing alone in that room wondering how I'd lost a fight I was right about. That wasn't justice. That was theater, and I refused to perform in it. Have you ever had to swallow your pride and play along with a lie? Just to survive long enough to fight back. So instead, I let go of the edge of the dining table. I pressed both palms flat against my thighs and breathed. I counted to 5 in my head. Then I lifted my chin and looked directly into Martha's eyes. She was waiting for me, expecting me. That greedy, hungry gleam was still there behind her tears, the certainty that I was already beaten, that I'd either cave to Marcus's demand or crumble entirely. She watched me the way a cat watches a mouse that's already cornered. I nodded. Slow. Deliberate. Calm. Of course will help, I said, and my voice didn't tremble. I'll take care of it first thing in the morning. Martha's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. She dabbed her eyes one more time, let out a shaky exhale, and thanked me with a sweetness that sent ice up my spine. Marcus leaned back in his chair, smug and self-satisfied, convinced he'd just witnessed his dominance in action. He reached over and patted my hand like I was a dog who'd fetched a stick. I let him, because I wasn't saying yes because I believed her. I wasn't agreeing because Marcus ordered me to. I was agreeing because I wanted to see exactly how far they were willing to take this lie. How deep a hole they were digging for themselves. Every step they took toward that $85. 000 was one step closer to the trap I was going to build. The trap they'd never see coming. The next morning, I walked into Owen's office at 747 a.m. earlier than I'd ever arrived at the firm in 4 years of working there. Owen is our in-house counsel, and his workspace is a glass fishbowl. Floor-to-ceiling windows on every side. So every meeting happening inside is visible to the whole floor. I shut the heavy glass door behind me anyway, and the click echoed through the open-plan office loud enough to make 2 paralegals look up. I didn't greet him. I dropped my leather bag on the floor, sank into the guest chair across from his desk, and let him see all of it, the dark circles, the pallor, the exhaustion I'd been running on since 300 a.m. When I'd given up on sleep and started replaying every second of that dinner in my head, Owen took one look at me and slowly pushed his keyboard away. He's a quiet man, mid-40s, the kind of lawyer who lets silence do the heavy lifting. Brenda, he said carefully. What happened? And I told him. Everything. I told him about Martha showing up early on a Tuesday night with practiced tears and a tissue pressed to dry eyes. I told him about the collapsing roof that wasn't collapsing. The dead HVAC system that worked just fine. The contractor who supposedly needed payment before the house fell down around them. Then I gave him the number that mattered, $85. 000, and told him about Marcus slamming his palm on the table and ordering me to wire it to his mother's account first thing that morning. As if the money were his to give, Owen didn't interrupt once. He just sat there. And I watched his expression shift from idle curiosity to something far more serious. Have you ever had to sit across the table from someone and nod along while you watched them lie straight to your face? I asked him. That was my entire dinner. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward and clasped his hands. Do you have anything in writing? No. A contractor's estimate, photos of the damage? No. Just her word. Owen sat back, and his concern hardened into deep professional alarm. His jaw tightened. Does your husband know you're the one paying for everything? Everyone knows, I said flatly. They just pretend otherwise. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost see the legal machinery turning behind his eyes. Where's the money right now? In my savings account. Untouched. Good, he said, and something in his voice shifted, like a door clicking shut. I'm going to tell you something, Brenda, and I need you to hear it very carefully. That was the moment everything changed. Owen didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, clasped his hands, and fixed me with a look I'd only ever seen him use in depositions. Brenda, I need you to hear this and not get defensive. Do not send a single cent to that woman without a legally binding contract. Not $1. I opened my mouth to argue, but he held up a hand. I know you want to keep the peace. I know Marcus is screaming at you. But listen to me carefully. If you wire that $85,000 to Martha's account today, with nothing in writing, you are handing her a gift. Under the law, that's what it becomes. A gift, I repeated, the word landing like a slap, to a judge. Yes, without a formal agreement that clearly states this is a loan with repayment terms, interest, and both signatures. Martha can stand in front of any court and claim it was a generous family gift. Parents receive gifts from their children's spouses all the time. It's believable. And the moment she makes that claim, you have no legal recourse. None. No contract means no obligation to pay you back. You'd lose every penny. And she'd walk away completely untouched. The room felt colder than it had a minute ago. Owen had cut through every argument I'd rehearsed with something I hadn't let myself fully face. I'd been so focused on Martha's lie about the roof that I'd ignored the deeper trap underneath. I know, I said quietly. That's exactly what she's counting on. Owen raised an eyebrow. The informal nature of family favors. I went on, the realization settling in my chest like ice. Martha isn't stupid. She didn't ask for a loan agreement. She didn't ask for terms. She asked me to hand over money to my husband's mother with nothing but his word backing it up. Because that's how family works. That's the loophole. She expects me to feel too awkward to demand paperwork. And then when the money's gone, she'll shrug and say it was a gift. I looked down at my hands. It had never been about the roof. It had been about the absence of proof, the absence of any record that could force her to give it back. Have you ever had someone weaponize the word family to get you to hand over money with no paperwork? I asked. More to myself than to Owen. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Then we're not going to let her use it. Owen said, turning to his computer. If she wants the money, she's going to sign for it. But first, I need you to promise me something. I looked up. Promise me you won't send a single cent, not $1 of that $85. 000 until I've drawn up the paperwork. Even if Marcus screams. Even if Martha cries. Even if they both call you heartless. You don't send it. I met his eyes. I promise. And I meant it. Because for the first time since that dinner, I could see the shape of the fight ahead, and it wasn't about yelling louder than Martha. It was about making her sign her name to the truth. Owen's fingers moved across the keyboard with a precision I'd never seen from him before. He wasn't just writing a contract, he was building a wall. The secure legal database hummed on his second monitor. Rows of standardized corporate templates scrolling past as he pulled up the master promissory note form like a mechanic, selecting the right tool for a job he'd done 100 times. This is the foundation, he said. Not looking up. A promissory note is nothing more than a written promise to repay. Simple. Clean. Devastating if you know how to use it. I watched him strip away the template's generic language and start fresh. He typed slowly at first. Deliberately. Then faster as the structure locked into place. The document took shape on his screen in cold, black text. Borrower agrees to repay the principal amount of $85,000, $85. Ling ling ling. Plus interest at the standard rate. He paused, highlighted the interest clause, and turned to me. How long do you want to give her? 1 year, 2. The longer the term. The smaller the payments, but the longer she stays in debt to you. I thought about it. 18 months. Monthly payments. No exceptions. He nodded and typed. Installments of $4. 722. 22 per month. Due on the first day of each month. Commencing 30 days following the disbursement of funds. The math hung in the air. I'd calculated it myself on the drive to work. Every payment was a reminder. Every missed date was a breach. He scrolled to the top and inserted the most important clause. I leaned in and read it twice. This loan is strictly a loan and shall not be construed as a gift. Contribution. Or transfer of assets. Owen looked at me. That single sentence is what separates you from every other daughter-in-law who's ever been fleeced by family. When Martha signs this, she's signing away her ability to ever claim otherwise. He kept going. Default clauses. Acceleration clauses. Attorney's fees. Notice provisions. The entire machinery of the law, designed to turn a tearful family request into a transaction enforceable with a judge's signature. I watched the document grow. Section by section. And something in me shifted. This wasn't about the roof. It wasn't even about the money. It was about 3 weeks of being treated like a wallet with legs in the cold. Immense relief of finally doing something about it. Standard interest. Repayment schedule. Binding signatures. Owen said, scrolling to the end. Once she signs this, Brenda, she can't cry family in court. She can't claim it was a gift. She can only pay. He saved the file and met my eyes. You're not giving your mother-in-law a loan. You're handing her a mirror. She's going to look at this document and see exactly who she is. I didn't answer. I just watched the final draft settle onto the screen, a cold, hard, binding financial transaction, born from a family request that had never been anything but a lie. Then Owen leaned back in his chair and gave me a look I hadn't seen before. Patient. Almost paternal. The promissory note is the skeleton, he said. But a promise to pay is only as good as the person making it. And your mother-in-law has already shown you exactly what her promises are worth. I nodded. He was right. A signed document meant nothing if Martha simply decided not to honor it. Marcus would scream at me. Martha would cry, "Victim!" And I'd be stuck chasing an $85. 000 ghost through the courts for years. Owen pushed his keyboard aside and turned to face me fully. That's why we're adding a security agreement before she signs a single line. We're going to attach her collateral to this loan, a physical asset she can't hide. I can't claim sentimental value over, and can't pretend doesn't exist. My mind immediately went where his was headed. There was only one thing Martha loved more than money itself. And it was the way money looked sitting in her driveway. Her imported luxury car, a gleaming, pearl-white German sedan she'd bought the moment Richard retired. Financed with money she didn't have. She drove it everywhere. She parked it in the most visible spot at every family gathering. Then stood beside it, pretending to check her phone just so people would ask about it. That car wasn't transportation to her. It was her crown. Her proof that she'd made it. The one possession she'd defend before she'd defend her own marriage. The car. I said. Owen smiled a slow, sharp smile. The car. He turned back to the screen and started drafting the clauses. Every word was deliberate. The security agreement defined the vehicle by its VIN, its make, its model, and its condition at the time of signing. It stated in unambiguous legal language that Martha granted me a security interest in the vehicle as collateral for the full $85. Ling ling ling. And then came the part that made my pulse quicken: the default provisions. If Martha missed a single scheduled payment, or if she defaulted on the loan in any way, the agreement gave me the absolute right to file a civil lawsuit against her immediately, without further notice, and force the court to authorize the seizure of the vehicle. The marshals would physically take the car. It would be sold at liquidation. Every dollar recovered would go directly toward what she owed me. The beauty of this, Owen said, scrolling through the final version, is that a car can't plead family? It can't manipulate. It can't cry. When she signs this, she's agreeing that if she lies to you again, the law will take the thing she loves most and sell it to pay you back. I looked at the screen and felt something settle in my chest. 3 weeks of being treated like a wallet with legs, and now I finally had a weapon. How do I get her to sign it? I asked. Owen's fingers hovered over the keyboard. You show her the money first. Let her taste it. That's the only thing that will move her past her pride. We spent the next full hour going through those documents line by line, word by word. It wasn't just a review, it was a dissection. Owen read every clause out loud. And I listened with my elbows on his desk, my chin resting on my clasped hands, checking each provision against every possible escape route Martha might try to use. Family ties meant nothing in the cold language of the contract. No clause that could be twisted into a gift exemption, no buried exception that could be called an act of generosity. No interpretation that could turn the loan into a handout. Owen made sure of it. At one point, he found a tiny loophole in the repayment schedule, a section that could have been read as allowing a grace period if the borrower claimed financial hardship. He highlighted it, deleted the entire sentence, and replaced it with language so absolute that even a creative lawyer couldn't stretch it. She doesn't get to plead poverty after she signs this, he said, his voice flat. Her signature means she acknowledged she had the means to repay. That's going to hurt her if this ever goes to court. The printer hummed in the corner, warm and steady, spitting out page after crisp page. The sound was almost therapeutic, a quiet counterpoint to the storm raging in my chest. Each sheet slid out with that clean, final click. Like a verdict being sealed, I collected the stack. It felt heavier than it should have, maybe because of what it represented. Years of being treated like a wallet with legs, condensed into a thick stack of cold, binding law. I aligned the edges, tapped them against the desk, and slid the promissory note and the security agreement into a manila folder. Simple, professional, deadly. I thanked Owen. I didn't have the words for what he'd done for me. He'd taken my desperation and turned it into a legal weapon. He just nodded and said, "Bring her to the table. Let her see the check. Then let her sign her own destruction." I walked back to my desk and picked up my phone. I stared at Martha's contact for a long moment. Then typed, "I have the money. We need to meet face to face. Saturday. Devais pay. M. The cafe near the mall. Come ready to finalize everything." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The reply came faster than I expected. Barely 30 seconds later, finally. "Don't be late." I almost laughed out loud in the middle of the office. She thought she was winning. She thought I'd folded. Just another obedient daughter-in-law who'd come around to her senses. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I got to the coffee at 8:22. 8 minutes early, because I needed to be settled in my seat before she walked through the door. The place was strategically neutral, soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers, the low hiss of an espresso machine, and just enough scattered customers to make a scene uncomfortable but not impossible. I chose the booth at the back, where the light was dimmer and I could see the entrance clearly. I ordered a black coffee I didn't plan to drink. The check was already in my bag, crisp and heavy, and the manila folder sat beside it like a coiled spring. Adoy uno. Martha swept in like she was accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award. Cream silk blouse, pressed so sharply it could have cut glass. Fresh blowout. Jewelry that caught the light. And her signature designer handbag swinging from her elbow as she threaded between the tables. Every step telegraphed the same message I've already won. She slid into the booth across from me without a word of greeting. "Well?" she said, folding her hands on the table with a satisfied little smile. You're actually on time. Let's not drag this out. I have a hair appointment at 3. I didn't answer. I reached into my bag and set down the first item. Dead center on the table between us. The cashier's check for exactly $85. Ling, ling, ling. Her eyes found it instantly. Going wide and greedy. Drinking in the number the way a starving person drinks water. Then I placed the second item beside it. The manila folder. Thick and heavy. Holding 51 pages of sharp-edged law, Martha's hand darted toward the check. Quick. Reflexive. She wanted it in her fingers before the ink could dry. But I put my palm flat over the paper, pressing it down against the wooden table. And her nail stopped an inch short of my skin. Not yet. I said, calm and low. Read the papers first. What papers? The smile flickered. But she reached for the folder anyway, yanking it open with a snap. The first page hit her eyes and I watched her process it, the bold heading promissory note. The principal amount. The interest rate. The repayment schedule. Her brow furrowed. By the time she reached page 3, the smugness had completely drained from her face, and when she got to the security agreement, the section where her imported luxury car was named, in black and white. As collateral, her knuckles had gone white against the paper. This is a joke, she said. And it wasn't a question. The trembling. Fragile mother from my dining room was gone. In her place sat a woman who'd just realized she'd walked into a trap she couldn't claw her way out of. Her eyes flicked between the check and the contract. Doing the math in her head, she thought she could just take the money, run to Marcus, and let him scream me into shredding these papers. I could see it in her face, the arrogance hadn't died. It was just regrouping. I didn't blink. I didn't back down. I tapped the signature line with my index finger and said, sign it. And the check is yours. The red started at her neck and crawled upward, flooding her cheeks until her whole face burned. Her jaw tightened. Her nostrils flared. And when she finally moved, it wasn't to reach for the gold pen in her purse, it was to slam both palms flat on the papers. Hard enough that the cashier's check slid an inch across the table. Are you insane? Martha hissed. Her voice low and venomous, vibrating with pure rage. This is family. Brenda. This is my son's wife. Hauling me into the middle of a cafe to treat me like a common criminal. I didn't move. I didn't blink. She grabbed the edge of the contract and shook it at me like it was something filthy. Cold-blooded. That's what you are. Absolutely cold-blooded and heartless. You sit there calculating every single penny against your own relatives. You think I don't see it. You're turning a favor between family into a business transaction. And I will not stand for it. Her voice climbed, sharp and brittle. And the couple, 2 tables over, stopped pretending not to listen. Marcus told you to give me this money. He gave you an order. You don't get to rewrite the rules because you're feeling clever with your fancy lawyer friends. You don't get to trap me with legal garbage. She shoved the contract toward me, her designer bracelet clattering against the wood. Tear it up. Right now. Tear this garbage up. Give me my check. And we forget this whole thing ever happened. We do this the way Marcus said, family takes care of family. You're just the one with the bank account. And that's your role. That's how it's always been. That last line hung in the air between us like smoke. And something inside me went perfectly still. Because she'd finally said the quiet part out loud. Not a daughter-in-law. Not a partner. A bank account with legs. And she just told me exactly what she thought I was for. Then don't sign it. My voice came out calm. Almost friendly. The check stays in my bag. And you can explain to Richard why the roof you told him about never gets fixed. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. The rage was still burning in her eyes. But behind it, I could see the panic clawing its way up. She looked at the contract, then at my purse, then back at the contract, doing the desperate, frantic math of a woman with nowhere left to run. "I'm not signing anything," she said. But her voice cracked on the last word. I let her words hang there. And then I moved. No arguing. No justifying. No pleading. I'd spent 3 weeks swallowing her lies. And I wasn't about to spend one more second defending my own money to a woman who'd never earned a dime of it. I reached across the table, picked up the cashier's check, all $85, 000 of it, and slipped it back into my purse. Then I grabbed my keys, the metal clicking softly against the wood, and stood up. "What are you doing?" Martha asked, her voice sharp and suddenly uncertain. I didn't answer. I just tucked my purse under my arm, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and took one deliberate step toward the exit. "You can't just leave," she said. Louder now. "We're not finished here." Another step. My heels clicked on the cafe floor, and then I heard it. The sound of a woman realizing she's about to lose everything. The arrogance in her voice shattered, replaced by something raw and desperate. A gasp. A strangled breath. And then, wait. I stopped. Not quickly. Not eagerly. I let the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds before I turned, my face perfectly neutral, and looked at her. Martha's hands were shaking as she smoothed out the crumpled legal papers on the table. Her designer blouse suddenly looked too tight, her perfectly styled hair falling loose around her face. Her eyes darted between my purse and the door, and I watched the desperate math happening behind them. If I walked out, there was no check. No resque. The mountain of secret credit card debt she'd been hiding for years would finally catch up to her, and there was no one left to save her. "Give me the pen," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't move. I just watched. She fumbled through her designer handbag, her fingers trembling so badly, she dropped it twice before she found her gold-plated pen. She bent over the contract and scribbled her signature on every single line, page after page, her handwriting jagged and uneven. Nothing like the confident flourish she'd used when she walked in. She signed so hard the pen tore the paper in 2 places. "Happy now," she snapped. Shoving the signed documents across the table, I sat back down and took my time inspecting each signature. Every page accounted for. The promissory note, the security agreement, all of it. Only then did I slide the check across the table. Martha snatched it before my fingers had even let go. She didn't look at it, didn't thank me, didn't even breathe. She just clutched it to her chest like a lifeline, her knuckles white. "Go," I told her, folding the signed documents and placing them in my bag. Before I changed my mind, she grabbed her purse and fled through the cafe door, leaving her coffee untouched on the table. I watched her go through the window, her silk blouse disappearing into the afternoon sun. And for the first time in 3 weeks, I smiled. There it was, right as her fingers closed around that check. I saw the arrogance flood back into her eyes. She thought she'd won. I could read every thought in her head like a headline scrolling across my own mind. The contract meant nothing to her. In her mind, it was just a piece of paper she'd signed to get what she wanted, a temporary hurdle. Not a real threat. Never a legitimate danger. She was already planning the moment she'd cash that check and the moment she'd complain to Marcus. And she was dead certain what would happen next. He'd scream at me, pound the table, flex his authority, and force me to shred the documents into confetti. To her, I was still the obedient wife, the one who paid the bills and kept the peace. She truly believed she'd already won, which was exactly what I was counting on. She had no idea that every page she'd signed was sitting in my bag, already reviewed, already photocopied, already lethal. I folded the signed papers carefully, paid for my untouched coffee, and drove home with the windows down and the sea air in my hair. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for her birthday. The next time I saw her face was exactly 1 week later at precisely 7:00 p.m. On the evening of Martha's 58th birthday, Marcus and I walked into one of the most exclusive traditional lobster restaurants on the coast of Maine. The private dining room smelled of garlic butter, fresh seafood, and expensive perfume layered over hot candle wax. White-gloved waiters moved silently between tables, and the rich amber glow of the lighting made everyone look like they were posing for a painting. The entire extended family was already seated around a massive oak table, the chatter loud and festive. Silverware clinking, wine glasses rising in constant toasts to the birthday girl, sitting at the head of the table with a crown made of silk flowers. And right in the middle of that chaos sat Patricia, Marcus's aunt, the undisputed loudspeaker of the family. Patricia had a terrifying gift. She could scan a person for 3 seconds and find the insecurity they'd spent decades hiding. She thrived on conflict, the way other people thrive on oxygen. If a family dinner felt too peaceful, she created drama just to keep herself entertained. And if there was a secret buried anywhere in that room, Patricia would sniff it out and drag it into the light. I looked at her across the table. She was already looking back at me. Good. I thought, I need you tonight. Marcus didn't even glance at the prices. He snapped his fingers. Actually snapped them. The sound cutting through the chatter like a slap, and the head waiter appeared at his side within seconds. Reserve list, Marcus said. Not a request, but a command. The waiter returned with a leather-bound wine list heavy enough to double as a weapon, and Marcus flipped through it the way a man flips through a magazine he has no intention of buying. He didn't stop to consider. He didn't ask my opinion. He pointed at 3 entries with his chin. These? The 97 Bordeaux and both Burgundies. From across the table, Patricia's sharp intake of breath carried over the laughter. Even she recognized those labels. I recognized them too. I knew exactly what they cost, because I would be the one paying for them. The 1,997 Bordeaux alone carried a price tag north of $4,000. By the time the waiter uncorked the 3rd bottle, Marcus had spent more on wine than I earned in 2 weeks. He did it beautifully. He let the sommelier pour a taste, swirled the glass with practiced arrogance, then nodded like he'd been drinking vintages like this his whole life. The table applauded. The bottles made their way around the circle, everyone exclaiming over the aroma, the color, the sheer audacity of ordering such wealth for a family dinner. Then Marcus pushed his chair back and stood. He raised his glass to the room. Order whatever you want, he announced, his voice ringing with the confidence of a man announcing a presidential run. Only the best for my mother tonight. I'm covering the bill. The relatives erupted. Genuine roaring applause. A few whistles from the younger cousins. Martha pressed her hand to her chest, eyes shining with damp pride. She glanced at her sisters with a look that said, My son is a king. Patricia clapped louder than anyone. Scanning the room for someone who might envy her, I sat perfectly still, my hands wrapped around my small black clutch. Inside was a thin white envelope that carried more power than every bottle on that table combined. I did a running calculation in my head between courses, the 3 bottles, the lobster towers, the private dining room minimum by the time the waiters cleared the main plates. Marcus's announcement would cost my checking account nearly $12,000. His credit cards were maxed out. I knew because I was the one who'd made last month's minimum payments, but I didn't say a word. I just smiled, raised my glass, and let the lie hang in the air like perfume. Let him perform. Let them applaud. The moment was coming, the thin envelope in my clutch. The $1 bill? The contract that would bring it all crashing down, and I had a front row seat. The waiters cleared the last of the lobster shells, and the table transformed into a stage for the gift-giving. Aunts pushed back chairs and reached for the presents they'd stashed beneath their seats. Silver wrapping paper, Gold ribbons. Tissue spilling out of designer shopping bags. Patricia held up a silk scarf in a glossy box like a trophy. Someone else presented a high-end espresso machine with a flourish. The mountain of gifts in front of Martha grew, and she glowed with smug satisfaction. Then came the pause. Every head turned to me. I was holding only my small black leather clutch. No box. No ribbon. No gift bag. Patricia's sharp eyes locked onto my lap, and a malicious grin spread across her face. "Well, Brenda," she announced, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Everyone has presented their gifts to the birthday girl. I see you didn't bring a box. Did you leave it out in the car, or did you just forget?" The clinking of silverware stopped cold. The background jazz suddenly pressed down on the room like a weight. All eyes fixed on me. Martha's smile vanished. She looked at my tiny clutch. Then at my face, and her lip curled with raw disgust. "Did you come here to freeload?" Her voice carried across the silent dining room. Sharp as a blade. "You show up to my special birthday dinner empty-handed. Are you really that cheap with your own family?" The words stung. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. But I held perfectly still. I had been bleeding quietly for years. I could survive one more minute. Marcus couldn't. His face flushed deep crimson as he watched his carefully built performance shatter in public. His fist came down on the oak table, a violent slam that rattled the water glasses and sent a spoon clattering to the floor. "Why are you still sitting there?" he barked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Don't embarrass me in front of my family. Give Mom the cash envelope right now." His voice cracked with panic. This was never about Martha. It was about him, about proving to the assembled relatives that he was still the wealthy provider, the man with the obedient wife. Patricia leaned in. Hungry for the drama, Martha crossed her arms, waiting with a satisfied smirk. Confident her humiliation of me was complete, I looked at his desperate face, at Martha's greedy eyes, at the relatives who had watched me carry this family for years without ever once offering me the respect I deserved. The silence stretched, and I placed my hand on my clutch. The table would find out soon enough what was inside. But that was my secret, and it was about to become theirs. I didn't rush. I let the silence stretch for one breath. 2 breaths. Just long enough for every eye at that table to lock onto me. Then I calmly unclasped my small black clutch, reached inside with 2 fingers, and pulled out a thin white envelope. Nothing else. I slid it across the oak table toward Martha. Martha snatched it before it stopped moving. She tore open the flap with the speed of a striking snake. No thank you. No glance in my direction. She was too busy smirking at Patricia, savoring the moment she'd humiliate me in front of every relative who'd ever heard her call me cheap. With a triumphant sneer, she tipped the envelope upside down over the center of the table. A single, slightly crumpled $1 bill fluttered out. It landed on the white tablecloth like a dead leaf. Limp and pathetic. The private dining room went completely silent. Martha frowned. She shook the envelope again. Nothing. She turned it inside out, and only then did a sharply folded piece of heavy legal paper drop out with a dull thud. Her frown melted into confusion. And then her eyes locked onto the bold, capitalized heading. I watched the blood drain from her face in real time. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch vanished, replaced by a woman who looked like she'd just seen her own grave. "What is that?" Richard demanded. His calloused hand shot across the table and grabbed the document before Martha could hide it. She made a desperate grab, but he was faster. He pulled his reading glasses from his shirt pocket, slid them onto his nose, and began reading aloud, his deep, authoritative voice echoing against the walls of the private room. Promissory note and security agreement. $85,000. He paused, his brow darkening with every word. Legally binding loan provided by Brenda to cover emergency roof and HVAC repairs. With the luxury vehicle as collateral, he lowered the paper, His hand was shaking, not with fear, but with the kind of rage that builds in a man who's just discovered he's been lied to for months. He stared at Martha, and when he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Roof repairs. You borrowed $85. 000 behind my back for roof repairs." Then he slammed his fist on the oak table so hard the wine glasses jumped. "I withdrew money from my own retirement account and paid that contractor in cash for the entire roof last month. Every dime. The work is already done." The table exploded. Patricia gasped with both hands over her mouth. Relatives froze mid-bite. Martha opened her lips to explain, but nothing came out but a strangled sputter. "You told me there was nothing wrong with the house," Richard continued, his voice rising. "You told me to stop being paranoid. So what was this money really for?" "Martha, what were you covering up?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just sat there, pale as the tablecloth, while the perfect facade she'd built for decades crumbled into dust right in front of everyone she'd ever fooled. Then, under the crushing weight of Richard's furious glare, Martha finally cracked. Her shoulders collapsed inward, and genuine tears cut pale tracks through her carefully painted face. "It was never the roof," she whispered. For years, she'd been quietly funding a luxurious lifestyle behind Richard's back designer bags. Diamond bracelets, lavish vacations with her sisters all stacked onto secret credit cards. The debt had ballooned into a monster she could no longer outrun. The $85. 000 wasn't a repair fund. It was her only escape from total bankruptcy. The private dining room fell into a suffocating hush. Even Patricia sat frozen. Both hands pressed against her mouth. Marcus broke the silence first. He lunged across the table, his trembling fingers reaching for the contract in Richard's hand. "Tear it up," he ordered, his voice cracking with desperation. "Brenda, I'm your husband. I command you to tear that paper up right now." I snatched the document from his reach and slipped it into my clutch. "You don't command me," I said, my tone icy and steady. "You never have. I paid for the mortgage. I paid for the utilities. I paid for the luxury SUV you drove here tonight." I looked straight into his terrified eyes and delivered the final blow. "I'm cutting off all financial support. And I'm filing for divorce." 2 days later, I did exactly that. The legal machinery moved fast. Facing the ironclad promissory note and security agreement, Martha's defense attorney surrendered immediately. To satisfy the debt, she sold her beloved luxury car at a massive loss, then drained her $401k retirement fund early, triggering brutal IRS penalties just to repay every cent of the $85. Ling, ling, ling. Richard couldn't forgive the betrayal. Several agonizing months later, he packed his things and ended their decades-long marriage. Marcus collapsed even faster, without my paycheck propping up his image. The bank seized his SUV. His credit score cratered. And the man who'd once snapped his fingers at headwaiters, ordering $1,000 wine, now lives in a cramped, run-down apartment with a flickering hallway light. Last month, I bought a beautiful sunlit apartment in a quiet neighborhood. This morning, I stood by the window with a cup of hot coffee, watching the city wake up, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: profound peace. I didn't just get my $85. Nol back. I got my entire life back. As I stood by that window this morning, I realized the true victory wasn't the $85. 000, I clawed back. It was the moment I looked at my own reflection and finally saw someone who refused to be a wallet with legs. For years, I set myself on fire to keep my husband and his mother warm. I paid for their luxury, their lies, their image. And in return, the woman I called family tried to humiliate me in front of everyone. But that crumpled dollar bill on the white tablecloth taught me something priceless. You can't buy respect. You can only demand it. If you've ever been treated like a bank account by the people who should love you, I hope my story gives you permission to draw the line. Because the marriage I lost wasn't a marriage, it was a sentence. And the contract I handed over wasn't a weapon. It was the truth. So here's my question. Have you ever had to hand a toxic relative a contract instead of cash? How did they react when the mask slipped? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And I promise, I'll answer. And if this story made you feel a little less alone, hit like and subscribe so we can keep fighting together. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope our paths cross again soon.